My name is Ray Elman. I'm an artist among many other things that I've been involved with. I first arrived in Provincetown in 1970, moving up from New York City. I drove up in a 1952 Chevy carryall van with Ohm symbols painted on the side and everything I owned inside, including 10 5x6 foot stretchers and a carton of Baba Ram Das tapes. I had come here in June of 1970 with a college friend who stopped into my apartment in New York and said, "Hey, we're going up to Cape Cod. Do you want to come with us?" And I went with him and his wife. I had never been here before. We got to Truro in his Jeep, and all of a sudden he pulled onto a fire road and drove out to the edge of a bluff overlooking the sea, and and you had me at the ocean. I never knew that something like this existed on Cape Cod. In the East Coast of the United States. I'd been to Big Sur and seen those big bluffs, but I didn't know that it existed on the East Coast of the United States. And that night we camped at the North Truro campgrounds, and we went into Provincetown to a running of the movie version of Ulysses at something called the Peeping Delia, which was a combination movie house and coffee shop in the west end of Provincetown. And the guy who owned it was named Steve Hickok. While I was sitting there watching Ulysses, I got the idea that maybe he'd be interested in having me run the Peeping Delia in the winter. And I went up to him and I said, if I run this in the winter, can I take the chairs down during the daytime and use it as an art studio? He said yes, so I returned to Provincetown in 1970, not knowing anybody really, except Steve Hickok, who I'd met for 15 minutes. Steve took me for a walk down Commercial Street, and the first person we ran into was Terry Kahn, who was a reporter at the time for the Provincetown Advocate. And Terry and I became lifelong friends. We were best men at each other's wedding. I was not as impressed as I should have been by the fact that a 25-year-old artist could arrive in an established art colony and within a year or two get to know most of the artists in town and be welcomed by older artists who've been coming here for years. In retrospect, it was a testimony to the kind of place that Provincetown is, that people judge you not by your accomplishments, but by the kind of person you are. And if you're a nice person, you have a lot better chance of being accepted into the community. Once I got here, I got involved with a lot of nonprofit institutions. I started something called the Outer Cape Repertory Film Society, at which I showed 16mm movies. I'd never even run a projector before, so doing it was a little bit perilous. The first time I ran a movie, the pickup chain broke, and I had to twirl the pickup reel with my finger to make the movie run. From the Outer Cape Repertory Film Society, where, by the way, I think the height of my accomplishments was to show a double feature of Orson Welles' Macbeth and Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. From there, but from the Outer Cape Repertory Film Society, I moved over to the 2B Coffee House and managed that for a number of years, where entrees were 50 cents, soup was 25 cents, tea was a nickel, coffee was a dime, and desserts were 15 cents. And needless to say, in the wintertime, we were always crowded. We had poetry readings and art shows, people played music, and sometimes we would have celebrity guest chefs. And then I got involved with other entities, like I was on the board of the Art Association, Provincetown Art Association Museum for a long time, and Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater. I was the president of the Provincetown Group Gallery for a while. And in 1985, Chris Busa and I co-founded Provincetown Arts Magazine, which I participated in until our son was born in 1989, our son Evan. And then I left the magazine but started doing the portrait series that is on exhibit now at PAM. And I've stayed active in the community and also started a new art magazine now in Miami Beach. The reason I put a stake in the ground here, I think, besides, you know, when I was younger and living here year-round from 70 to 76, I always felt like if anything ever happened to me, the town would take care of me. I don't know if it's certainly idealistic, but I never felt in those days like you would see people wandering around town who clearly didn't have it all together. They might have their pants held up by a rope, but the town wouldn't let them starve to death, and the town wouldn't have them sleeping out. You never saw homeless people sleeping in the streets in Provincetown. And the extraordinary thing, and the reason I started this portrait series, is living out here, you met so many interesting and accomplished people. Pulitzer Prize winners, there's probably 30 some odd Pulitzer Prize winners that have lived here during my time on the Cape, and people in other media. I think in some ways Bob Freeman, B.H. Freeman, summed it up well when you consider Provincetown. He had moved from Provincetown to the Hamptons, and we asked him to write a story for Provincetown Arts comparing Provincetown and the Hamptons. And he said something like, in Provincetown there's sidewalk vitality, and when the tide is out, constant traffic on the flats. In the Hamptons there are no sidewalks and everything happens behind tall hedges. I think a lot of artists have chosen to be here as opposed to places closer to New York because of the low-key nature and camaraderie of the art community, and the easy access that everyone has to one another. So we have the opportunity to influence one another and learn from each other in a very relaxed atmosphere.